Rich Maisano with Bristell Aircraft. What I'm going to be doing for you today is a walk around of your brand new aircraft. We're going to show you how to take your cowling off and point out a couple of the key engine components, as well as some of the access panels and tire pressures and so forth. So let's get started with taking off your cowling. The cowling uses what's called Skybolt quarter turn bolts. The first thing you want to do is set your prop in a triangle form so this blade is pointed to the top, and we'll just start in the front, work our way back with the quarter turn sky bolts. One thing I do want to point out is make sure your canopy is down in the closed position when you are taking off your cowling. On the Bristell, just to point out before I take off the top cowling, we do have our oil door right here. It's a little push button, push in, and the door will open up so you can check your oil in your Rotax oil reservoir. So what we'll do is we'll go around and we'll make sure that our sky bolts are not engaged. We put one hand here and we just kind of jiggle up and we lift, and then you come to the other side and you'll do the same procedure. You'll jiggle, you'll lift, come back to the other side. You may have to. Again, if you have another person, this does make it a little easier. The cowling comes off just like so. Now we have access to the top part of the engine, which generally speaking should be enough for you to do any kind of visual inspection. I will show you now how to take the bottom cowling off on a Rotax 912 IS powered Bristell. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove this connector, which is a push button. We remove this connector for the sensor that is in the panel air filter, which is right underneath in this cover. There's a K&N panel air filter that needs to get serviced every 100 hours or annual. This sensor is for your ambient pressure and ambient air temperature. The easiest thing to do is take your screwdriver, take off this aero duct by unscrewing the clamp just to loosen it up. Now that side is taken off. We have the pilot side here, has another aero duct that goes to the heating clamshell muff on the exhaust muffler. So we'll take this off, loosen it up. We can remove this, just tuck it in here for now. And now what we can do is start the removal process of the cowling, the bottom cowling. There are, I believe, 3 screws on either side. And we're going to do this with 2 people. Much easier with 2 people. That way we don't scratch anything. Our helper over here, Ben, has helped us. So we're going to remove the cowling. We're going to tilt the front down, and we're just going to come out right in between the blades. And now the cowling, lower cowling, is off. Now we have open access to the engine compartment of the Bristell light sport aircraft. What I'm going to show you now is the proper way to burp the engine, which really should be done prior to each flight, at the very least the first time flying of the day. To burp the engine properly, we remove the cap on the oil container. That'll give us access to the dipstick, which is in the oil container. We come to this side of the aircraft, and we rotate the propeller in a counterclockwise rotation, nice and slow. As we come over the compression area, you can feel a little bit of pressure, and what we're looking for is to hear with our ears a gurgling sound coming from the oil canister. This procedure varies on aircraft to aircraft and whether the engine is cold or warm. Sometimes it can take as little as 2 or 3 turns through. Sometimes it can take as many as 12, 15. There we go. So what this procedure is doing is actually using the compression of the engine to push any residual oil back from the crankcase into the tank. And once you do it once, that's generally enough. You should be able to actually get it to go again after that first time. What we'll do now is we will check the dipstick. The dipstick on a Rotax 9 series engine has a flat spot right in the middle of the dipstick, and really your oil level should be, after you burp the engine, no lower than the minimum and no higher than the maximum. We generally like to see it right in the middle to the upper half. As you can see, this dipstick, the oil is right at the very minimum. So that would require roughly a third of a quart to get it up into the upper half, or a third of a pint of the dipstick. After you check your oil, you're going to put your cap back on. What we're going to do now is go over some of the key components of this engine and where they're located. This bottle right here is our coolant overflow bottle. Generally, this bottle, when the engine is cold, should be no higher than the middle portion of this bar. As you can see, this engine is a little hot, and it has expanded. So with the coolant level in the middle portion of this bar, when it's cold, will allow there to be expansion and to not overflow the coolant bottle when it gets up to running temperatures. However, if it is slightly overfilled, extreme conditions, you could possibly overflow it, which we do have a vent tube off the top that goes to the bottom of the aircraft if that does happen. So again, when the engine is cold, we want to see about halfway in this bottle. On this side of the firewall, we also have a fuel filter. Okay, this is our fine fuel filter. The system on our Bristell aircraft has 2 fuel filters. You have a coarse filter and a fine filter. I will be showing you the coarse filter in a little while, but this is your fine filter. This filter should get replaced on the first 100 hours of operation, and after that, the Rotax manual specifies at this current time every 200 hours that this filter should get replaced, unless you feel that it's contaminated, at which point it should be changed immediately. So with the engine here, as you know, it's a FADEC controlled 4-cylinder 100 horsepower engine, which is liquid cooled and air cooled. So what we're looking at right here is your intake going into your throttle body, into the plenum of the aircraft. So this is where all the air comes into, and as the air comes in, it mixes with the fuel. The fuel is carried by 2 fuel injectors per cylinder, as well as ignited by 2 spark plugs per cylinder for redundancy. The engine is basically split apart, two sections, so everything that's happening on this side of the engine is happening on that side of the engine. You have an EGT sensor in cylinder 1 and cylinder 3, as well as cylinder 2 and cylinder 4. We have an oil pressure and temperature sensor in the back of the engine. Our starter lives on the back of the engine. On the front of the engine, we have the Rotax gearbox. So the gearbox, currently reading the maintenance manual, should be serviced at 600 hours if you're using 100 low lead. And with the IS, it is recommended to actually get this serviced with using auto fuel at the same interval. At this present time, we want to, this gearbox we want to make sure is healthy, and at 600 hours should be serviced. If we're using auto fuel, we've been able in the past to stretch it out to 1,000 hours, but we still recommend and feel that 600 hours this should get serviced and reshimmed and get put back up to 100%. So this is where our oil filter is located. Oil filter needs to get changed with the oil every 25 hours if you're using 100 low lead, or every 50 hours if you're using auto fuel. At those intervals, we have a magnetic indication plug if we have any magnetic debris that has circulated through the engine and or gearbox. So the magnetic plug should be inspected at every oil pressure, every oil filter and oil change. Here is our expansion tank for our coolant. Generally, as an owner, this is something that you do not need to open or check. Most of all your coolant replenishing, if needed, would be in your auxiliary tank, which I showed you earlier. If you're looking at the engine, you're seeing these orange lines. These lines are your oil lines. They're covered with a fireproof hose. We have an oil thermostat. So the oil thermostat is rated at 190 degrees Fahrenheit. So this will open up at 190 to allow it to go through your oil cooler in the front of the engine. As we follow back towards the firewall, we showed you your oil tank. I pointed out where the muff was for your heat and your muffler. Right here's your muffler. On the firewall, we have what's called the Rotax fuse box. A lot of people get this confused with the ECU. This is not the ECU. The ECU is actually located on the cold side of the firewall, inside the fuselage, underneath the fuselage glare shield cover in the back of the avionics. So this is your fuse box. There are several fuses in here that very rarely do they blow out, but this is the protection, for your sensors, your fuel pumps, your ECU, anything engine related. Fuses are in here. In your installation manual and maintenance manual, there are descriptions as to what each fuse does and what each fuse goes for. The last part on your firewall is your battery. This is a 12 volt 18 amp hour Bosch battery. We also allow the EarthX battery, the Deca battery, and if you find a battery that you do want to use that is not one of those two, then you just need to contact me and we can see about getting you an LOA for the battery that you may want to use. The manufacturer has used a couple different batteries over the years. Varta is another battery that we've used. So all in all, that is the major parts of the aircraft engine. We do have, again, I had said it's oil, it's water cooled. So this is your water radiator down here. Let's do a little walk around now of the aircraft. As you can see, this aircraft has all the wheel pants on. Nose wheel pant, as well as the other two main wheel pants, do have a notch in here, so you can check tire pressure relatively easy. Just like a car, you would use a tire pressure valve. We generally like to keep the nose gear tire about 10 pounds less than the main gear. So we're looking about 18 to 22 pounds for the nose gear. The main gear were 30 to 32 psi. Again, the main gear, they do have notches cut out in the wheel pants as well, so you have easy access to tire pressure. On the bottom of the aircraft, you're going to see a fuel sump. This fuel sump should be checked prior to each flight. Here is our lockable fuel cap. There is a key for your lockable fuel cap that you'll have when you take delivery of the aircraft. We are able to use a minimum of 91 octane auto fuel or 100 low lead. The aircraft can use ethanol free 91 octane as well as ethanol based fuel up to 10%. I'm going to repeat that, up to 10% ethanol 91 octane. As we continue down the leading edge of the wing, you're going to see your landing lights. Underneath, we have our pitot and AOA tube. We have a nice big 1-inch hole tie down here. Our anti-collision strobe and nav lights. Here is our aileron, which has aileron trim. This is our flap. And when we are doing our pre-flight, really what we're looking for is to make sure that we don't have any bolts or nuts loose on our flap or on our aileron. We're looking to make sure that our tires don't need air. I did want to point out that there are access panels underneath the wing for inspection. As we continue to go around the fuselage, we'll see some antennas. This is a GPS antenna. This is our comm antenna. This is our ELT antenna. These are our static ports. Okay, we have our identification plate right here. As we go around to our elevator, the one things we look at on a pre-flight are there are 4 bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4, that attach the elevator and the horizontal stabilizer to the fuselage. Those 4 bolts are safety wired vertically, and you should always make sure you see the safety wire intact. As long as the safety wire is intact, we also generally mark it with marking paint to make sure that the bolts don't move. So you should always be on the lookout for that. The other thing we do is we torque seal or mark with paint this bolt for the push-pull tube for the elevator. So you want to always double check and make sure that we don't have anything loose there on our elevator. When you do move the elevator up and down, you generally hear a little bit of a rubbing sound. That is due to our gap tape. So it's a Mylar piece of tape that goes across for gap seal. Coming around the fuselage, again, we have a nice big 1-inch tail tie down. This access is for access to look into some pulleys for the rudder cables, and this is also a place that we can check the rudder cable tension. In the rudder itself, there's a bolt up here that you just want to take a step back and look at and make sure that that bolt and nut is still in there. That's the top hinge point. And the bottom hinge point, very, very hard to see unless you have a scope, but that's deep down in there. We have our other static port on this side. We'll come across over here and we'll take a look again at these bolts on the flaps and on the aileron to make sure that we don't see anything loose or broke. This aircraft does have a wing walk on it the whole way from the aft side to where this grip tape stops here on the wing root. You can walk on this whole section. This band right here is a cover for the spar attach points of this aircraft. This is what allows us to walk on this side of the wing root, because we have our attach points outboard of the root under here and here. We also have fuel lines that join under there, and we have electrical lines that join under there. This part on inspection is a part that definitely needs to come off on both sides when you do a annual or conditional inspection, 100-hour inspection. We have our wing lockers, which are lockable wing lockers on both sides of the aircraft. You can store up to 44 pounds in each wing locker, and they do come with a wing locker storage bag. A lot of people ask what this panel up here is for. This panel up here is where the BRS parachute system would go if you had it installed. If you did not have it installed, then this panel is purely just an access panel, which does make it nice to do any avionics work underneath the panel. You can take this cover off here and you can gain access to areas that you might not be able to access when you take the glare shield off. And now I'll go over where the fuel pump location is and the coarse fuel filter. We'll get on our back right here. The camera will show there's an oblong panel underneath your aircraft with Phillips screws. The fuel pump is kept in this area, as well as a cleanable, but you can also replace it, coarse fuel filter, which should get checked again every 100 hours. Should get checked and cleaned and annualed. When you do the annual or 100 hours, should get checked or cleaned or replaced. So as we round back to the front again, we've completed the walk around. Give us a call at 1-833-2-FLY-BRISTELL if you'd like to reach us. Other than that, have a great day and thank you for watching. I'll be looking forward to answering any questions.